Welcome back. The Grizzlies made their first-round pick last night, Cedric Coward out of Washington State, but just a couple of weeks ago, they didn't even have a first-round pick to use. That was until they traded Desmond Bane. As a reminder, the Grizzlies gave up Bane in order to get Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Cole Anthony. They got back pick 16 in this year's draft, which became pick 11, and they got first-round picks in 2026, 28, and 30, a first-round pick swap in 2029. They traded the 2028 first-round pick to the Blazers in order to get Coward. Bane spent the last 6 years in Memphis, was the 30th overall pick by the Grizzlies back in 2020, one of the best three-point shooters in the league. The Grizzlies will miss his shooting, if nothing else. But Zach Kleiman felt like now was the right time to make some major moves after the Grizzlies had bumped their heads against the ceiling one too many times.
Not a decision that we came to lightly. You know, we really wanted to take a step back, not overreact to the end of the season, and digest where are we. You know, the goal is the goal, which is to win a championship here in Memphis. And we reached the point where we felt like, you know, you don't just go out and make that trade, but if there were opportunities, you know, to build around John Jaren, you know, with a different type of build.
So, Michael, you got into it a little bit right before we went to break, but What do you think about what Kleiman says here about using your clear pillars and Ja and Jaren and trying to build around that as a potential championship winning roster?
Yeah, it's a moment where you look in the mirror and you have an honest assessment, as we said, and I think I agree with the idea that, look, you kind of reached the ceiling with the Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. trio. Now, some people say, oh, injuries played a factor and all these other things. Sure. But at the end of the day, it was a large enough sample size where we're talking about 5 seasons together, and you got one playoff series win to show for it. And then Kleiman talked about the idea of basically this being a copycat league, right? Mm-hmm. The last 2 champions are really good examples of teams who had minimal defensive weaknesses in their starting lineups. With the Boston Celtics, you had Derek White and, you know, all those guys, but Derek White and Drew Holiday as the guards are really setting the tone defensively. With the Oklahoma City Thunder, no weaknesses that you can just look at one guy in the starting lineup and say, that's who we're going to go at. So the Grizzlies, in a way, say, okay, we got Ja and Jaren as our foundational pieces. Let's focus a little bit more on getting those type of players, the guys who are going to be really standout defensive players. And that's kind of the refocus, the reshift from an identity standpoint. So it makes sense to me. You know, at the end of the day, he did say, you know, it was tough, you know, letting go of Desmond Bane. But I like the idea of kind of, you know, you're restarting a little bit where you're not necessarily rebuilding and like, you know, starting all the way from ground zero, but you're kind of going to work your way back up and see what this new look Grizzlies team will look like.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't feel like they are going to you call it a rebuild if you trade Jaren and or Ja.
Yeah.
They've made it very clear that they don't plan to do either one of those things, right? You do bring in a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope who has championship-level experience. You bring in a Cole Anthony who is a very good bench piece, probably could start on a lot of teams, won't start on this team, obviously, and they still may move him, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that they will move Cole Anthony in order to bring somebody else in? Because I asked that question mostly because they used the 2028 first-round pick to get Cedric Coward, so you lose a piece of that, you know, draft capital that might be attractive to another team. Do you foresee them still using Cole, or is he going to be on the team in fall?
It's tough to say. I lean more towards the idea that he won't be on the team. We don't know when that'll happen, but I'm just looking at the roster makeup right now, and you look at this Grizzlies roster, and you say, okay, Cole Anthony, smaller guard, scoring guard, has the ability to pass the basketball. That's what you can say about Scottie Pippen Jr.
Yeah.
And you have him as someone who's already been in the organization, very defensive-minded. And Scottie Pippen Jr. was one of the Grizzlies players who actually played really well in that playoff series. So he's coming off of that good performance to build up on. And there's some kind of overlap there with the idea of Cole Anthony, Scottie Pippen Jr. I don't see both of those guys being in a rotation. So it's a situation where the Grizzlies will have to figure that out. It is a sizable contract to a certain degree, talking about a little bit around, you know, over $13 million. So you got to find a team that's going to take that. You're probably going to have to, you know, send out, like you said, some of the draft capital assets, depending on what type of team wants that contract. But they're in a good enough situation because of that draft capital that you just mentioned. Even after trading that 2028 Orlando Magic first-round pick, the Grizzlies own all of their own first-round picks going forward, plus they have that draft capital. And that 2026 pick that they got from the Orlando Magic, that is going to be one of the best draft assets going into the rest of this offseason and going into free agency next year, however you want to look at it. That pick right now potentially could be a top 10 pick next year.
Yeah, and certainly is one that they are thinking hard about using for themselves. But I think what Kleiman's noted even before the draft, we talked about the end of the season, where he's like, we got unintentionally younger. It seems like with the Cedric Coward pick, you're intentionally getting younger with the idea of that particular player having high upside, right?
Yeah.
But it seems like they're not necessarily wanting to move more in that direction. And really, he kind of doubled down on that idea last night when he says, hey, we're not necessarily one player away from being a championship contender even yesterday, which tells me, okay, you're trying to get to that status, but you don't even think you're necessarily going to be there next year. Yeah. It almost feels like you're taking a mulligan kind of year. He's not going to say that.
Right.
But when you draft Coward, you're not necessarily expecting him to be the contributor in next season.
Yeah, it's a different look. It's a different way that the Grizzlies have vocally communicated their expectations since I've been here, since the 2021-22 season, when in those years you talk about back-to-back seasons where you won over 50 games, number 2 seeds in the playoffs, and then you have some early exits in the playoffs or whatever the case may be. But even after those seasons, even after last season when all the injuries happened, championship expectations were still here. It was still like, oh, we make one move here, we make one move there. Boom, we're right there with the best of the best in the West. And even during this past season, you go to January, the Grizzlies are the number 2 seed.
They're right there, yeah.
They're right there behind OKC. Everyone was looking forward to that early February game where it was going to be OKC versus the Grizzlies, potentially a number 1 versus number 2 matchup.
And they got waxed.
And yeah, they got beat down, and everything went downhill pretty much from there. But it's a different realization to the fact that, hey, look, we are not who we thought we were. And this is the first time I've heard them say that, and Zach Kleiman has said it multiple times to the point that, yeah, it is kind of like, all right, let's take a step back here. We ain't fine in the West. We might need to duck a little bit of smoke.
Even though Cedric Coward clearly believes they're fine in the West.
Cedric Coward, he's coming with that mentality.
Which, as a rookie, you kind of need,
I
right?
like it.
I do like it. I do like it. On another note, Kleiman said they didn't do an expanded coaching search before hiring Tomas Isolo full-time. Do you think that was the right move? And he did answer a direct question when he said that, so he kind of couldn't duck that particular smoke. But interesting that he would admit, like, no, we did not make a coaching search. And I guess a lot of times they announce when they do that kind of thing.
Yeah. In this situation, it was unique. I mean, he had 9 games to take over. And Isolo was one of the main people who pointed that out. Like, he didn't get a lot of practice time and things like that, but he was able to impress the Grizzlies. So to me, it felt like he was really interviewing for this job long before he actually became the acting interim coach or whatever the case may be. But I'm always in favor of you just got to go through the process, right? Like, even if he is your guy, he's probably going to be our guy. Let's bring in some other candidates. Let's show him our roster and let's say, what are you going to do with this? You got Morant here, you got Desmond Bane, you got Morant and Jackson Jr. Show me how you can get this roster to the Western Conference Finals. Show me how you can make this a championship roster. Let's see what they say. Get the different inputs, intel from different coaches, and see what you can do with that information. But so that would be my approach to it. Even if he's your guy, bring in a couple experienced guys. You got guys like Mike Brown out there, Mike Budenholzer, Frank Vogel. These are championship coaches, so to speak. So I would have just done the homework,
the due diligence. Yeah.
But even if he was, your guy, and that happens in business a lot. Like, sometimes who's going to be your person, but you still want to go through the process. And I feel like they should have done that. But at the same time, we're going to see if this was the right decision. And it won't take long with Isolo taking over here relatively shortly.
Big year coming up for the Memphis Grizzlies. The next thing that we have to look forward to now is we'll actually hear. Well, we got 2 picks tonight, second round. We'll hear from all the rookies on Friday is the expectation. But after that, we're talking about the Summer League. So if you want to keep up with the Memphis Grizzlies and know what they got going on, follow DeMichael Cole and his writing over at the Commercial Appeal.